I'm here.
Hello. It's nice to see you.
Yes, absolutely. Good. So we can do our little starting prayers.
Yeah, let me get them for you,
Mm.
for us.
All right. Okay. We can do this one as well. Why not? Shall I sing it?
Sure, you have a beautiful voice.
Ah, okay. So we're just thinking this one is just making an offering as a request for the teachings. So imagine offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. Saji Perky, we're thinking all the lovely things of the universe, all the things that people use, is what it means by our mandala. Our mandala is sort of our abode, so the abode of this world. And all the marvelous things that make people happy, we pile them up and imagining offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. Saji Perky Jugshing Metog Tramri Rablingji Ni De Genpaji Sangye Jingdu Mikte Uwagi Drokon Namdag Jingla Chepashok. And now imagine Buddha happily receives our offering. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. All right, and now the next one, our motivation and our reliance, reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. Yes, that's it. So we're just thinking, we're going to rely upon the Buddha Dharma Sangha, assuming we've made a commitment to do that. It's how we feel. So that's until we're enlightened, we're going to do that as our method for then developing our marvelous potential to become a Buddha so we can be of benefit to others. Something like that. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupha shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupha shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye dropa shok. All right. Who remembers what I talked about last week? I get very lazy and I forget. I'm sure we've been probably through the basics of the mind being not physical. It's not the handiwork of a creator or our mummy or our daddy. It's not the brain, although it depends upon the brain. Of course it does at the grosser levels. So this is the whole emphasis in Buddhism. The whole point, that the unique, amazing point in Buddhism is the central role of the mind. I mean, we've got brilliant views about the mind and neuroscience and so on and so forth in the world, in the modern world, but we would never say the mind is central to everything. I mean, the Buddha literally says the mind creates everything. Of course, it sounds utterly cosmic, unless you understand what he means, because his view of the mind is so radically different, actually, isn't it? I mean, it's not physical, it doesn't come from mummy and daddy, it doesn't come from a creator, it can't come from nothing. It's a product of cause and effect, which means it's beginningless. And the Mahayana view would say it's endless, and it can go to far more subtle levels of cognition. The mind is so super powerful. Let's just talk a bit about that today. The marvelous potential of the mind, the astonishing potential of the mind. I mean, insane, demented. It sounds like science fiction if we think in ordinary, neuroscientific terms. And of course, that means the potential to be utterly free of all delusions and full of all the goodness, which is meaning Buddha, literally. So of course it sounds like religion. So when it's religion, you can say what you like. Doesn't matter, does it? Because you can't prove it, we think. But this is literally Buddhist psychology. And where's all this information come from? His own experience. We have to take that as an absolute given here. Otherwise, it's just fraud, isn't it? It's just a whole lot of nonsense. So yeah, and of course this is holy. I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama when I was editing Lama Yeshe's book on Mahamudra, which is about realizing the ultimate nature of the mind, its emptiness, based first on understanding its conventional nature, meditating on its conventional nature. I mean, Lama talks a lot about this in the book. You know, it's marvelous. But I remember reading His Holiness's commentary on the same text that Lama used, this Panchen, the text by the Panchen Lama on Mahamudra. And as His Holiness said, you can learn all about the mind. You can be, I mean, there's extensive knowledge about it in the text, and in the monastic university system, they study it for, you know, intensively. Both the way it functions and the psychological model. But as he said, of course, you actually have a direct experience of your own mind, to really actually cognize your own mind. That's pretty subtle. I mean, if it's not physical, you can't see it, taste it, touch it, smell it. It's kind of abstract for us, pretty abstract, you know. But I think what's really marvelous about the mind, if we think about the Buddhist approach to the mind, you know, I mean, if you go to a neuroscientist and you ask them to please tell you about the pure nature of mind, that has no meaning, does it? I mean, we don't discuss the brain as having a pure nature. It's like, you know, yuck, like everything else in the body, you know, and it turns into yuck when you die. So it's a bizarre concept. It's totally, it's the Buddha's view. So of course, because also Buddha doesn't talk about a soul, that's the discussion in the creator religions. There's this extra component of a person that comes from the creator, isn't it? And even the Hindus, who also have, I mean, all this, much of the information coming from the Buddha is coming from what he got from the Hindus before him. You know, they still have a view of a first cause, this essential energy of God. You know, nothing like that in Buddhism. Mind is everything. And what's so fascinating when we think about how we create karma, which isn't the topic here. My light is wobbly. I've got a little kind of television studio here. I've got a light shining on me. There's a light shining on the Buddha. And light behind. Okay, so, you know, what was I saying? Yeah. I got distracted. I distracted myself. I mean, the pure nature of mind, let's look at that. It's actually incredibly encouraging. This is Buddha's unique, outrageous, amazing view about the mind. And you have to call it psychology. I mean, you know, we always use these fancy Greek words, don't we? I joke about that. As soon as it's fancy, we call it Greek. As soon as it's, you know, put it in Greek name. As soon as it's a mad and an illness, we put it in Greek, you know. So psychology, what's that? It's just a word we use in Greek for the mind. That's all. Buddha didn't know Greek, so he calls the mind. That's it. So the word mind, as we know, we've been discussing, is synonymous with the word consciousness. It's used in different contexts, but essentially it's referring to the same thing. This capacity for cognition. So what's so fascinating when you study both, you know, the discussion from Lama Yeshe about the nature of the mind, we'll discuss that, but also when you study Buddhist philosophy and you learn, you know, because you learn sort of, it's like the worldview of the Buddha, the contents of the universe, you know. So the very first category you learn, almost the first category, is a series of synonyms for that which exists. So the word phenomenon, the word object, the word existent, established base, object of knowledge. These are all synonymous, and they're all different terms with different definitions, but referring to the same thing. That something exists, and in different ways the definitions are similar. But what's marvelous about it, what's fascinating, this is the Buddha's point, that, for example, the term existent, what defines it, the definition of an existent, is that which can be cognized by mind. Now that's very fascinating. It's axiomatic that which the mind can cognize, a valid cognition, not some nutty cognition, a proper cognition, that which the mind can cognize by definition is that which exists. That's pretty intense. Think about this. This is the Buddha's view. I mean, you could never say that in Christianity, because God has the capacity to know that which exists, because God creates everything. There's not a fraction of view like that in Buddhism. Don't need creating. We create ourselves. Thank you very much for the Buddha. So that which exists is that which can be cognized by mind. And so the whole job of the Buddha, one approach to the whole job of being a Buddhist, one way of approaching Buddhism is a method to get happy and stop suffering. One approach is it's a set of ethics. And one approach, this is the key one, is to stop ignorance and get wisdom. In other words, to eventually be in sync with that which exists. That's the mind of a Buddha. And that's what Buddha's saying everybody can experience, you know. I mean, we know, I tell this story. I know when I was in a Catholic university in Melbourne, my city, I was asked to give a talk, 20-minute talk in some conference, you know, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about. In the morning I got there, I looked up the dictionary for the definition of God, and it said 3 essential qualities: omniscience, again, a fancy Greek word, look at it, knowing everything, knowing that which exists, put it that way, infinite compassion and infinite power to benefit, something like that, infinite power, omnipotence, another Greek word. So I thought that's interesting. They're the same qualities of a Buddha. The difference, of course, is that a Buddha is a being that everybody can become. We can all become Buddha. You can never say that in Christianity. It would be the worst sin of pride. If you can become God, then there are many people who create the universe. That's just not appropriate. But that's the Buddha's view. Every mind just naturally, this is how they put it, every mind by definition, by its very existence, possesses the potential to be a Buddha mind. That is to say, to be free of all delusions, full of all goodness. Every being possesses Buddha nature. We might have said this before. You know, that's what, we don't talk like that. But I use the example of a seed, say, let's say an acorn. An acorn, by definition, we don't speak it this way, but we know it's exactly right. An acorn, by definition, what defines the essence of an acorn is its potential to be an oak tree, isn't it? Well, that's what Buddha's saying about a mind. And of course, he's saying the universe is full of trillions upon countless trillions of mind streams. Mind possesses, I love this term in Tibetan, that we translate as sentient being. The term is mind possessor. Very delicious, you know. There are trillions of them. They're all beginningless and all endless, and they are all, every one of them, without exception, just naturally experiencing every millisecond the fruits of their past programming, their past actions, and every millisecond are creating the seeds, sowing the seeds for their future experiences. So as His Holiness said, sometimes like karma is like self-creation, and it's the mind that does it. You can't separate karma from mind, you know. Mind creates karma. Mind is the starting point in any action. Intention, I will, volition, that's the beginning. If you want a boss in here, it's called intention. We all think the I is the boss, don't we? There's a little mini me in there running the show, you know, like a puppeteer. That's how we all think. Don't need one of them, but mind is the boss. And which part of the mind? Intention. You know, this is where I think we did discuss, and let's discuss here now again. There's so many things to discuss. I'm running out of time for it. You know, we discussed the psychological model of the mind. You've got negative, positive, and I call them the mechanics of the mind. They call them neutral, but it's misleading to us. Neutral not meaning not important, but neither negative nor positive. So those mechanics of the mind, intention, attention, concentration, good memory, mindfulness is really just a capacity to not forget what you're doing moment by moment. Discrimination, there are many of these. And whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need these. That's the meaning of this third category. They call them neutral. It means neither negative nor positive. So this is why it's so important, if we do learn the model of the mind in Buddhism, you've got to understand the meaning of negative. It sounds heavy for us. It sounds punitive. We don't like to say it in psychology. Those negative states of mind that are distorted, delusional, neurotic, the source of our pain and the source of why we harm others. The positive, reasonable, useful ones that are rooted in interdependence and are valid and are reasonable and benefit others and help make us happy. And then the third lot, the mechanics that make us function. Again, whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. Thieves need mindfulness, as Lama Yeshe one time said, Lama Zopa said. So the Buddha's point, what Buddha nature, when you've accomplished your Buddha nature, what it means is you've rid the mind of all the rubbish. All you've got left is the virtues and all the other ones, you know, which are used only for virtue, because they're at the core of our being. They're what we are. So you can say the conventional nature of mind is the virtues. The ultimate nature of mind is the emptiness. And that's what Mahamudra is about, you know, learning to meditate first on the conventional nature of mind, the thoughts as they move along, and then till eventually we can get to cognize the emptiness of the mind, its ultimate nature. So, but just to hear, I feel that's what I find very encouraging. Just to hear, even to know intellectually this idea, Buddha's view from his own experience, that mind is naturally pure. Now that often we misunderstand that. When we hear it's naturally pure, what we tend to hear is a bit like, and this is similar to the Christian teachings, that we were pure once. God made us in his own image. We were pure, and then somehow faults happened, isn't it? This is a big discussion. I remember discussing with my Jesuit priest friend. From the Buddhist perspective, that's not a possibility. It's not saying that our mind is naturally pure doesn't mean we were pure once and then it got dirty. No, that's not possible because of cause and effect. So if at the moment you look into your mind and you see there's some anger there or some jealousy, that's a delusion. That's the pollution in the mind. Well, that jealousy comes from where? The previous moment of jealousy. And where does that come from? The previous moment of jealousy. And where does that come from? The previous moment of jealousy. And you cannot find a beginning to that. So therefore, we can't have been pure once and then lost it. But we've always got the potential to rid the mind of these delusions. Buddha has found that they are adventitious. Buddha has found that they're not at the core of our being. And that this is his point. So because they are not intrinsic to who we are, they're not integral to who we are, this should be so encouraging for us. Because it's exactly the opposite for us. I mean, this is why we go kill ourselves. Because we completely believe the stories of the depression, the anger, the jealousy, the low self-esteem, the despair. We totally identify with it as being our real being. This is so tragic. So to even know and think about and to read that, the teachings about the mind in Buddhism, it should give us courage. And then we're going to start to have the courage not to believe the stories when they're running the show, running rampant in our poor head. This is very powerful, As Lama Zopa says, bad enough that we see things incorrectly. This is the key thing the Buddha is saying. Well, the function of all the delusions, the function of the neuroses is to, one, is to make us miserable, to be very painful, but two, its key function is to distort things, is to distort the way things appear to us. It's like Lama Yeshe uses the example, always they use the example in his Mahamudra book. He talks about how the mind is like a mirror. And this is not how we talk. This is very fascinating. We don't talk like this, but this is exactly how they talk in Buddhism. And I'll quote in a minute. I'm about to say what Lama Zopa said. But the mind cognizes things like a mirror does. It reflects. You've got to really think about this. We're so addicted to discussing the brain. I'm nothing wrong. Neuroscience is great. But when we say mind, we visualize the brain, So this way that Buddhism talks in a much more subjective kind of experiential way is quite different, quite different. Mind cognizes like a mirror does. It reflects what is there. So as Lama Zopa puts it, what exists out there appears back to us in the mirror of our mind, in the aspect, they say this in the Buddhist psychology, in the aspect of whatever's in the mind. So if your mirror, as Lama Yeshe said, if your mirror's dirty, then whatever you're seeing out there, if your mirror's got, is polluted by anger, attachment, jealousy, depression, we kind of know this. Look how the world appears to you when you're depressed. Everything looks depressing, doesn't it? Everything looks gray and pointless and nothing. When you're full of joy, even the world is shocking. Things appear in a more delicious way to us. And this is the point. And this is the biggest mistake that Buddha is saying we make. The way everybody sees the world, this is literally this is the real dualism of the mistake the mind makes, is that we see things out there from their own side, having zero to do with my mind. As the way Lama Zopa puts it, the vast majority of all humans on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all. What he means is we know we're angry, we know we're jealous, we know we're happy, we know we feel those things, but we don't think they are affecting how we experience life. We think it's the outside thing. That's how the world appears to us, naturally, because of this eons and eons of practicing this primordial root delusion, ego grasping. And as Lama Zopa, another way he says it, is that all these delusions, ego grasping, the root delusion that has the misconception of the inherent self, which gives rise to this primordial emotional hunger to get what that fantasy self wants, which then gives rise, when it's thwarted, to anger, anger, annoyed, upset, frustrated, or even depressed, the aspects of aversion when it doesn't get what it wants. and all the other delusions. These delusions, these neuroses, these misconceptions, they, as the way he puts it, they, when they're in the mind and you see the chocolate cake, they, you know, in this case, it would be attachment. Attachment in the mind decorates on top of the chocolate cake layers and layers of characteristics that just aren't there. That's a really delicious way to see how the delusions function. But it's hard to see this because the cake appears to us, appears back to us through the lenses, through our mirror of attachment. So it looks delicious. But what we don't realize is that our mind, our attachment, is making it look delicious. We think the deliciousness is in the cake itself. That's the mistake. That's what paralyzes and keeps us in samsara. That's the final mistake, you know. And that everything appears that way because we've practiced it to perfection for so long. It's like you've believed all your life that when you see $5, you think it means 50. And you give it this meaning. It even appears to you as 50 because you're so believing it's that. And we can see this. We do this in our lives all the time. You know, we make all these mistakes all the time, you know, projecting onto things. We say that in the West, projecting things onto other people. The delusions decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. So this is where at least first learning this theoretically. You can't do this job of being a Buddhist if you don't know what it means. You can't just think you know your mind. No, Buddha's got a very specific definition of all these things. So then learning it first theoretically, you then start to apply it to your own mental process. You start to observe yourself doing exactly that. So our mind is pure in its nature, meaning it's always, as long as it exists, it possesses the potential to be free of delusions. Because why? Because Buddha has found their sort of additives. They've always been there, but they're like additives. They're like bells and whistles on top. You don't need them. They're the cause of suffering, and they lie to us. And we can remove them. That's the amazing job that Buddha has found, that he has done himself. That's the achieving of liberation, the removing of the delusions from the mind, so our minds can be in sync with reality. Literally, omniscience is a quality of a Buddha. That's the potential of every being. Of course, that sounds shocking to a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim. That's beyond shocking, but that's Buddha's experience. So in other words, the key job here is obvious. The key job is to use the mechanics of our mind, that third category, those parts of our mind, intelligence and intention, attention, discrimination, all these different ones, to use them to do the job, all work hand in hand together to do the job of discriminating between the delusions and the virtues. That is the job of being a Buddhist, from here to Buddhahood. That's it. It's mental. The job is mental. First, though, you've got to control the servants of the mind. That's like junior school. Then the real work starts when we become our own therapists, as Lama Yeshe puts it. And the job is to discriminate between, to distinguish between, in your own mind, which is so tough because of 1,000 thoughts a second, to distinguish between the neurotic, deluded, distorted, distressing delusions, the ones that exaggerate, and the valid states of mind, virtues. And this is extremely hard because in our culture, like I've been talking, we give them equal status. We see them all as normal parts of a normal person. There's no view in any neuroscientific view or psychological view that suggests that you can get rid of some part of your mind. We try like a joke and say we tried that in the 1930s, cutting bits of brains out, calling it lobotomies, and we know it didn't work. So we're not discussing the brain here, We're discussing the non-physical, subjective, cognitive process itself. That's Buddha's expertise, Any questions? Any old questions at all? About anything from past weeks, whatever you like.
Venerable Robina, this is Dana.
Yes, Dana.
Maybe I'm just operating a little slowly today, but can you maybe give an example of what you mean when you say that which exists is that which can be cognized?
Yes, cognized by mind. Yeah, So the point I was making is that the definition of a thing that exists, in other words, the cognition of something
is what defines it as existing. So all I'm trying to get at is the intense relationship between mind and what exists. Is that in other words, everything comes from the mind for the Buddha. It's a really good point, darling. Everything comes from the mind. So, I mean, finally, when we look at the ultimate way that things exist, which is, you know, called the emptiness of things, where things don't have an intrinsic nature. This is where it's really proven, where things don't have an intrinsic nature. No, forget that. Keep it simple. Keep it simple, which is about this. But, you know, for example, I've got on my wall here, I've got a nice mantra in Tibetan on the wall in a nice frame. It's done in gold on blue. It's very lovely. But I don't speak Tibetan. I don't speak Tibetan. So that for me, you could say that does not exist. I mean, I know perfectly well it is Tibetan. I've been told it means Om Mani Padme Hung, and I'm sure if I learned Tibetan, I could prove it means that, but I don't know it from my own experience. So my mind doesn't cognize that reality. When it's a valid cognition of what we mean by those letters, which is the conventional truth of Tibetan language, then that's what creates that thing. That's what creates it. It is actually, it proves it exists. By my mind cognizing it, my mind creates it. You can almost argue like that. The emptiness teachings, you know, that's exactly the point. If there were something intrinsic in those Tibetan letters, if they were intrinsically existing in the golden letters on the wall, which is how we think, then it would appear to everybody would read it. Everybody could see it. If something were intrinsically delicious, like the chocolate cake, when I'm looking at the chocolate cake, it appears to me delicious because I've got a view of chocolate cake. From my habit of eating chocolate cake, I'll build up the habit of it triggers pleasure when I eat it. So when whatever gives pleasure, attachment kicks in and exaggerates its deliciousness. So that's for sure. When I see chocolate cake, it looks delicious, let's say. But I don't think for 1 millisecond that deliciousness is coming from my mind. I think it's in the cake. So the mind makes things, the mind creates. The Buddha's, but finally the universe, I mean, this is karmically, it seems a bit abstract initially. This is something more even, that the whole universe, the way we experience things, the universe is how we experience, whether it's a hell realm or a God realm or happiness or suffering, comes from the mind, is dependent upon the mind. I mean, my friend in prison, the one I always use the example of, Sunny, who was on death row for years, accused of murdering 2 policemen. Her children had been given away. Her parents had died in a car accident. Her husband had been executed. His head even burst into flames. You can't imagine, one nightmare after another. And she said, finally, she said, I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I had a choice. She changed her mind. She saw things differently. So that's like the mind creating that, you know, she became happy because she reinterpreted what was in front of her. This is all proving emptiness, really. So all the definitions of those different terms, they're similar. They're all similar, you know. An object that's an object that can be known by the mind. Something that can be known by the mind is something that does exist. Mind creates things. I mean, it sounds silly because it sounds like magic wand. Not like that. Not like that. I don't know. How does that sound?
I think it helped.
Okay, good. I mean, it's just the point of it is, even if nothing more, it just shows the utter centrality of mind, one's own mind in the reality of existence, you know, from the Buddhist point of view. That's why that's why there's no concept of a creator, which is a shocking concept in many ways if you call yourself religious, because the usual default view of religion equals the creator, you know. The creator is omniscient and knows everything and has plans and runs the universe. Not for the Buddha. We run the universe. It's just that we don't realize it. We don't realize it. That everything we experience, we've created from our past actions. And you could argue that's another way of putting it, that everything has come from the mind. So, you know, for example, it's a very interesting one, this is a way of helping us understand environmental karma, because one way our actions in the past ripen in the present is in the very way the physical world impacts upon us. So, for example, if we're fat and healthy and whatever we eat nourishes us, you know, that's the fruit of, they say, of past non-killing, an accumulation of intentional programming of your mind and the habit of non-killing. So Lama, in the Vajrayana especially, this is very helpful. I find it very helpful. And I remember Lama Zopa. So first of all, His Holiness said one time in one book I was reading about the death process, he said, you know, that the Vajrayana system says that the universe consists of two things, basically: minds, consciousnesses, billions of consciousnesses, and then matter. And matter is made of the four elements. Well, in the European system, that used to be back at the time of Galileo, we talked about the four elements. Now we've got a million other elements, haven't we, in science? But this is still the model they use. And so, all, as His Holiness said, all minds, okay, the universe consists of matter and minds, but all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the four elements. This is just the way it has been observed to be true. So this is why it's described in the death process very, very in great detail. You've got gross consciousness, which is sensory consciousness, which is clearly inextricably linked to this gross body. You know, you can't have a cognition of I consciousness without an eyeball. Eyeballs don't see things. Consciousness sees things. So you could argue that say that it's that part of our mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball and all the nerves working nicely, that enables us to have a cognition of color and shape and so on. So the gross consciousness is sensory, and it's inextricably linked to the gross body. You can't have eye consciousness without an eyeball, so they're dependent, you know. Now we've got the subtle consciousness. We've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and extremely subtle consciousness. These levels of ever more subtle levels of consciousness connected inextricably to ever more subtle levels of physicality, the four elements. So the subtle body is made up of different components. It's made up we've got the subtle body is made up of 72,000 subtle channels going through our entire body from head to toe, like a subtle nervous system. And then coursing through all these channels are all these wind energies, prana. This is the same as the Hindu system. This is the Chinese system, similar, you know. And inextricably linked to all those different wind energies coursing through those 72,000 subtle channels are all our different states of mind, our mental states, which are more subtle. And so the Tibetan doctors, that's their system. They feel your pulses. She'll feel your pulses and she'll see there's an imbalance of certain wind energy that she knows is connected to anger. Anger is right. They have a saying in Tibetan, the mind rides on the wind. So the anger is inextricably linked to its own set of the four elements, the wind energy, the subtle wind energy. So is love, every state of mind. This is clearly not neuroscience. It's quite different, isn't it? So as Lama Zopa puts it, this is how we create karmically. This is how we create our own reality in the future. As Lama Zopa said, even just when the mind is angry, not even doing angry words or actions yet, just the mind is angry. Well, first of all, karmically, that programs your mind in the tendency to be anger, but simultaneously it is polluting the wind energies connected to anger, and that eventually is what causes you to be sick. I mean, sickness in the Tibetan system is the imbalance of those wind energies, you know, that then manifests at the grosser level. And that can be in this life or future lives. You'll have, you know, your anger energy pollutes the wind energies, which in turn ripens as your physical sickness in the future. And even in longer term, as Lama Zopa says, over many, many lifetimes, this impacts upon the external elements, which causes them to be imbalanced and disharmonious. So everything is created by the mind. Everything, the universe itself comes down to mind, what mind does. It's a very interesting explanation, isn't it? I mean, it's fascinating. And it's all, of course, it's all explained in great detail in the text, you know. So we create the universe. It's not meant to be a joke. I mean, His Holiness said sometimes karma is like self-creation. It's like that. It's a great way to put it. So this is why the very first level of practice, before we even look into the mind, the very first level of practice, junior school, entry level, grade 1, is control the servants of the mind. Abide by the laws of karma. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Don't badmouth, don't do this, don't that. Not because we get punished, which is a typical view we have if it's a creator, reasonable enough, but there's no punisher in Buddhism. Buddha's exhorting us not to do those actions because they pollute our minds and create our future suffering. We create our own future suffering. So if we really understood this one, we'd become saints in a minute. It's sort of like, well, you know that the wrong food you eat creates an unhealthy body. We know that now. And if we want diabetes, there's no way in the universe. If you don't want diabetes, honey, you know you don't eat that sugar because you know that the body you produce will be a suffering body. Well, that's the view of karma when it comes to the mind, because the mind, what the mind does, then produces based on what then the mind starts, then the body and speech do their actions, and then the whole caboodle happens. And then you create the future suffering of lifetimes and future suffering of your experiences, and your mind is crazy. So, you know, when we understand the law of karma, not as punishment and reward, which is how we tend to think of these things. There's no punisher, there's no rewarder. It's a self-created process, you know. We'd be saints in a minute. Who wants future suffering? Nobody. So don't create it, Buddha says. It's not a complicated concept. So again, just talking about the mind. The mind's the boss. But the very first level is control the servants of your mind. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. You know, then you can work on your mind. Then you can do that. Yeah. Anyway, any other questions, people? All over the place today.
I have a
Yes.
question, Ven Robina.
Yes.
This is Burke.
Yes, talk to me.
So I'm trying to understand. There's a few ways I could put this question, but one way is this: if an existent is that which can be cognized by the mind, what is the function of the mind that can distinguish between different types of objects? So in other words, it's not as if it's not a form of solipsism where whatever I think goes. You know,
No,
if I
like,
want to think that, you know, this horrible thing is good, then I can think that.
no, we have.
It seems
we have,
like.
No, go on. It's good.
But just say it seems like we are able to distinguish between, say, virtuous objects and non-virtuous objects.
Yeah.
Or when I relate to somebody, I can have the experience of saying, "Oh, you know, I regret what I said because that really came from my anger. It didn't come from you." But later, my mind is in such a position where I think, "Oh, I'm seeing you more clearly now." You know, not with the sort of veil of anger between us.
Right, sure.
But it's not arbitrary. I mean, it's like I seem to be able to distinguish between those states.
See, this is why I think I'm not sure, but in our culture, I think we don't, you know, I think psychology is the lowest on the totem pole of our sciences because we don't trust the internal process. We don't trust, it seems too subjective. We have to have objective reality. I think that's very much the way we are in science. We don't trust that, but Buddha's literally the opposite. And so then the whole approach in Buddhism, this is why he is presenting, you know, even when we think of ethics, and as somebody said, well, that's cultural. I said, no, not for the Buddha. It's a fundamental truth. Good ethics, by definition, this is why he divides the states of mind into deluded, negative states of mind and positive, virtuous states of mind. So a virtuous state of mind is one that sees, relatively speaking, sees reality. So, you know, if I say, let's say, okay, for example, if I'm saying you're my boyfriend and I say I'm in love with Burke, well, we know there are two things going on. One is this enormous attachment. This is in the negative category. And these are the deluded, neurotic, complete misconceptions. So attachment is a state of mind. It's real insofar as it's a state of mind, but it's completely a lie. It's rooted in the deepest lie of an intrinsic me that then is hungrily wanting what that intrinsic me wants. So then is desperately looking for something delicious out there, and the attachment totally believes that Burke will make me happy, that Burke is divine. So it's layers and layers and layers of literal lies in that attachment. It's got no basis in reality, At the same time, I will say, I love you. Now, that is a valid cognition. And simply valid really means that it's rooted in interdependence. It's rooted in the recognition. There's, you know yourself, like when there's attachment in my mind, I'm like this little vampire clinging to you, seeing a fantasy, feeling hungry, emotional, suffering, neurotic. But when I love you, and to some degree, if it's relatively reasonable and not polluted by too much attachment, then that is a sense of connectedness with you. And interdependence means connectedness. When you and I are harmonious, I'm seeing you and you are seeing me. We're seeing relative reality. We're not, see, when we're caught up in the delusions, we're not even seeing relative reality. Forget ultimate reality. We're living in la la land. We're making things up, quite literally. But if we've got relatively, if love and compassion are relatively prevailing, then we will be harmonious. I will listen to you. I'll hear it from your point of view. I'll put myself in your shoes. This is an expression of how we're interdependently existing. So, I mean, the valid states of mind are the virtues. Before you even get to realizing the ultimate state of mind, which is emptiness, even relatively, the virtues are valid states of mind. And it's something kind of, it's not, this is something you can prove, you know, by experience. So Buddha has a very clear presentation of what are invalid states of mind, which are those that have layers of misconceptions that cause you to appear back to me in a way that you don't exist. That's what makes them invalid. And also they're rooted in ego grasping, which is the opposite of dependent arising. It's this frantic sense of a separate me. So they're really, when the more we understand this invalidity of delusions, it's kind of like they're genuinely mental illnesses, you know. They literally were living in la la land. But virtues, and before you even realized emptiness, you can have incredible love and compassion and bodhicitta. They are absolutely valid cognitions. They are valid cognitions. Now that's emotional valid cognitions, but a simpler level of a valid cognition is, what is that, Robina? That's an iPhone. Now we can prove that, relatively speaking, pretty quickly. I check up on it, you know, and I see it, and I'll see it as an iPhone. That's a relative reality. But think about this. Who created an iPhone? Minds did. And then we buy into it. That's how we live our conventional lives. Please pass me the iPad. And we buy into that it is an iPad, and our buying into it is what makes it an iPad, and it functions as an iPad. That's ordinary relative reality that aren't even the emotional ones. What is 1 + 1 is 2 is a valid cognition, not intrinsically. We've invented the concept of 1 + 2, and we all buy into it. That's how we communicate. They are valid cognitions because they can be proved pretty easily. I mean, what's that, mummy? Well, darling, that's called a thermos. We made that term up. Okay, it's Greek again, I think. We made it up. We hear the word thermos. We know it's a label given to one company who made it. What's a thermos, mummy? She'll give me the definition. There's 2 parts. Well, sweetheart, you can see, she'll say it's this flat bottom metal container. And I can see that, but I'm not happy yet. I haven't got the real function. The function of it is the crucial point that tells you its real meaning, tells you what it is in its bones. Well, mummy, what does it do? Sweetheart, it keeps my tea hot. And then she has to prove it. Don't just believe her. She then has to do other work. This is how we establish something that exists. The term, one of those 6 synonyms for that which exists, is established base. We're just establishing what exists. What is establishing it? Our mind. We agree it's called thermos. No one has to force you. It's not thermos in its nature. We've agreed the label thermos refers to this. We've agreed it's the flat bottom metal container, and its job is to keep your tea warm. Don't believe mummy, go prove it. Put the tea in, put the lid on, look 2 days later, and you will find it is still hot. So still more to do. You have to then check in our conventional world, is there another definition of this type of thing that contradicts that? Once you establish those things, you tick the boxes, we all shake hands, we now agree this is a thermos. Who made it up? Minds did. There's no intrinsic thermos. This is the point. Conventional reality is what we all agree upon. That's why it's called conventional. Minds make it. Nothing else. It's not coming from God or somewhere else. That's the meaning. Do you understand? Also, do you understand? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to me that, you know, simply because we made it up doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I guess you could say.
Sorry, start again. What? Say it again.
It says it's interesting to me that simply because it was created by mind or designated by mind doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. No, that's exactly right. No, that's right. Because we say in the world, oh, it's only in the mind, meaning it doesn't exist. That's the point, because we want to be proving something externally from its own side inherently. So in other words, self-existence is implicit in the way we see the world right now. So, but what's so interesting when Zamazoba says, once we've realized the ultimate nature of the thermos of anything that exists, which is it has no intrinsic nature, once we've realized that, then he says, it's as if there's no thermos. But conventionally, there is a thermos. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So these two truths together. Because what happens is, when we hear that's empty, we hear, oh, there's nothing. Chuck it all out. Mind makes it all up. Oh, that means it's nothing. that's got no meaning, we say. So we become nihilistic and throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then we hear the Buddha says that things do exist dependently. And we go, oh, well, something does exist after all. And we go, cling, grasp. They're both the extreme views. The eternal view of something inherent and intrinsic, and the nihilistic view of nothingness. So we've got to start putting these two together and realize that depending on arising, there is something, but it's so subtle, as Lama Zopa says, it's as if it doesn't exist. And emptiness, which sounds like nothingness, but isn't nothingness. So they're putting these two truths together is the real point. It's exactly right. Just because the mind makes it up doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's right. It exists because it's made by the mind. That's why we can change the mind. I mean, that woman in prison is so clear. She decided, she even said, I finally realized, so listen, she'd been accused of killing 2 policemen. Her husband got executed. His brains burst into flames. It was like a nightmare. You can't imagine it, you know. She was on there for 17 years. The children, her children were given to her parents, and the parents died in a car accident, so the kids got chucked into the system. I mean, like one nightmare after another, in a cell on her own for years on end, you know. And she said, and the whole time when she described the process to me, she all the time was, you know, she's not a Buddhist. She knew she had the power to change her mind. She knew she had the choice. She knew that the way she thought about things was the main thing. She didn't say it like that even. So she even said, at some point I realized I couldn't change anything out there. But they couldn't take my mind from me. So she said, I decided I'm not a prisoner. I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell. I'm in a cave. Now, this book we've just edited of Lama Zopa's, and I really recommend you all get it. It's just so amazing. Rinpoche asked me a couple of years ago to put together all of his letters, about 100 letters to prisoners. And so we put it together as a coherent book, you know. These intensive teachings Rinpoche gives to these prisoners. One guy, I mean, he's about a third of the book. He got like a 45-page type letter. It's unbelievable, unbelievable teachings on emptiness, on attachment, and the whole approach of, yes, you can't change the outside, but you can change your mind, you know. So that's how he talks in the book. Try to think of prison instead of being miserable and going crazy and you can't get yourself out, you haven't got a key. Well, why not think of it as like being in a cave? It's like a hermitage. I mean, he'd give examples of Tibetans would happily lock themselves in a cave for years. So it's like, and this is the point about emptiness. Finally, there's no intrinsic prison, and she proved it by saying, I decided I'm not a monk, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. I mean, she's not living in a fantasy world. She knows damn well she's in this disgusting prison, but she decided to label it differently. The reality is we do this every day. You know, your sister's mean to you and you get upset, but you decide to change your mind and forgive her. That's exactly what we're saying here. The mind is flexible. We can mold our mind into any shape we like, as Lama Zopa says, you know. And this goes all the way to the ultimate. But even this one of establishing a phenomenon, an object of knowledge, an object as an existent, an established base, always the way that is that we have to define it as this first. How can we begin to discuss the reality of anything until you first establish what it is conventionally? A thermos, flat bottom metal container that keeps my tea hot. That we agree on it, we shake hands, and that's exactly what it is. And then we buy into it. So we buy into everything. It's like you could say that, but it's not meant to be cheap. That's what it means. We buy into 1 + 1 is 2, for God's sake. We learn it like crazy and learn all these amazing ideas, scientific views, mathematics, music, Bach's, we do it all the time. Bach came up with an incredible presentation of sounds. We learn it and we're buying into it, but we prove it to be true. Bach says if you play D and F and B major and you do it and you did what he just said, you proved it. We prove it by doing it. But we in the West, we think that if something, that's the only thing you can trust, and that you're going to see it with a microscope, just about like that, you know, not quite, but like that. In other words, the view of intrinsic existence is, it filters through all our knowledge, you know. There's an assumption of intrinsic existence in everything we think and do, you know. So it's very interesting. What else, people? Maddie had a question. Yes, darling.
Yes, thank you, Venerable. I don't really know how to ask this yet, but like, how do you know where you are in your practice?
Very good question. It's easy, honey child. It's easy as falling off a log.
Like I feel like I'm there. Like I feel like I'm just like welcoming all of this stuff into my mind, and I'm able to catch it in that, welcome it. All right, let this one go. Oh, I don't like you. I'm going to put you in my sack over here. But it's like, how do I know there isn't something out there that I'm just not prepared for yet? I have no, like, that's what I'm like.
Okay, wait. Let's keep it down to earth. Okay, of course it's down to earth. This is the thing about, you know, one of the things about our view, I think, of the mind in our culture. We have this sort of, we think it's this mysterious, like deep cavern of fascinating, interesting things that we've got to dig deep into and discover weird things. No, it's not like that. You see, if you're going to study, if you're, it's like you're asking me, Robina, I'm learning to play music. I'm learning Bach. How do I know where I'm at? You're asking that, aren't you? I'll tell you, it's very easy, honey. You look in your book of music pieces by Bach, which are presented in a very orderly way from grade 1 to grade 97 or whatever, and you will be able to check pretty quickly what grade you are at by looking at how you play the piano. So you can assess where you are. And honey child, if you don't know where you are, you're in serious trouble. But this is, we're not used to thinking this way when it comes to a spiritual path, but it's exactly the same. So this is, but also the other point is this, darling. Usually with music, you don't go and learn 25 years of theories before you play the piano, do you? You learn a bit of theory, then you play the piano, and they both grow simultaneously. Well, in one sense, you could say that here, but not quite, because you could go to the Tibetan Monastic University and study the theories and the philosophy and the epistemology and the psychology and the metaphysics for 25 years. So you wouldn't just leave it in your head, but you'd probably learn a lot more theory than you've got the ability to experience as truth yet, and that's okay. But that's why the process, they always say, it's first you listen. So you got to listen to Bach's music, then you think it through to try and find the logic of the theories, and then you put your hands on the piano and you get the experience of it. So the same here, you listen to the concepts: impermanence, emptiness, karma. You learn the theory, you listen to the theories. Then you try to think it through to see how it's coherent. And the fact is, Buddha's view is a coherent worldview. We mightn't like it, but in its own logic, it is coherent. We try to see the coherence of these thoughts. And then slowly, and this is what does take time, to actually get the direct experience of these things, you've got to have single-pointed concentration, and you've got to, you know, in order to go to a subtler level of your mind where you will have the direct non-conceptual cognition of the truths of these things. So the experiential takes a lot longer, but still it can go in gradual. If you just leave everything in the head, you could be the best Buddhist philosopher, best Buddhist professor, but still go home and beat up your dog and hate your mother. That means it's great theory, but you don't put your money where your mouth is, you know? So we've got to, at our own level, got to try and experience what we can, but not to expect a miraculous experience overnight. Nothing wrong with learning the theories, but attempt to apply them every time you see your mind, every time you see your life. So we can get a sense of where we're at, you know, but it's like, yeah, but it's easier with music, I'd say. It's easier with cooking, but it's still like this. And the thing is, all this only applies if a person is actually committed to the Buddhist worldview. I mean, many people who listen to the teachings are listening out of interest to see if they like the Buddha's view, you know, before they commit to actually doing it. And that's okay. But we're talking here, the only way to know where you're at is if you're committed and you are, you know, following that path. And another way to put it, which is to show the power of intellectual knowledge. Don't underestimate it. It seems to me, if any body of knowledge is valid, whether it's music, acupuncture, Buddhism, I don't care what you call it, you know, if any body of knowledge is valid, it must be coherent intellectually first. That's really true in Buddhism. That's a logic. You could learn the whole of the theories of like some acupuncture without putting a needle in anybody, and you could even teach somebody else because it's coherent theoretically. Music is the same. Cooking is the same. Math is the same. I think this is a valid statement. If you want to argue with me, please argue. So that's really important in Buddhism, whereas we don't tend to think that spirituality is a coherent worldview. We think it's mystical, unable to be proved. You've got to believe it. That's the view of religion in our culture. So this is quite a shock to hear this approach, you know. So one step at a time, Maddie. Just keep moving, baby.
Thank you, Ven Robina. And like the confidence is almost alarming to me because I don't want to have too much.
Don't get carried away. No, that's right. Don't get carried away. Just one
Thank
step at a time. What else, people? What else, people? Dearest people.
Hi, Robina.
Who's that? There's
It's
Richard.
Richard.
Hello, Richard. Happy to see you.
Really good to see you, and thank you for
Yes.
the wonderful talk.
Sure.
I was listening to one of your other teachings, and somebody had asked a question which I thought was kind of interesting. If we go back, like let's say we get born into a lower realm because of our karmic debts that we need to pay. Let's say I get born a lion and I eat meat, so I need to kill to survive.
That's right, exactly.
How am I going to build, if I'm accumulating more karma, when do I get a chance to build to a human again,
Yes.
a lower realm, and I have, because that's my nature.
Yes. So the thing is, Richard, the thing is, if we've got these beginningless lifetimes, we've been human in many lifetimes, and many of the seeds we planted in our mind of virtue when we were humans haven't yet ripened. So they're sitting in the mind of that lion latent. So eventually that lion, as a lion, you can do nothing but do what lions do because the programming is so intense. You've got to kill. You've got to rip the guts out of the buffalo every day. And you keep telling the lion the buffalo doesn't like it. She can't see it, you know? So, but she can't do anything as a lion, but she's got those human karmic seeds planted in her mind from past lives that it's like a miracle one day at the time of some death will ripen and she'll get a human body again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. What else, people? What time is it? 8 o'clock. So, yeah, 8 o'clock. We're all in the same time zone. That's right. What else, people?
Can I ask one more question?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. When you were talking about the chocolate cake, as we throw a lot of big dealness to it,
Yeah.
project our, wow, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Can we also say that it's true that I know it tastes good from past experience? You give a baby, sugar or vegetables,
Right. Yes.
choose sugar.
Yes.
So is there an inherent nature in it? That,
Okay. It's a good point. A very good point, Richard. Okay. So this is where still we can say, yeah, we can still define sugar as having the character of sweet. We can do that. The sort of sour, sweet, these different tastes, there's different, whatever we call them, isn't it? We can say that that's true. But still the experience, it can be said to be that conventionally, just in the same way you can say conventionally, a thermos is a flat bottom metal container that holds the tea hot. You can say that. But so the sugar though, but if because it's a dependent arising and a mind, you've got a body that when you eat sugar, you vomit and die, then, you can't say it's going to trigger pleasure. It's very obvious. In exactly the same way that Sunny, we can argue that definitely what we label a prison, I would say the definition of a prison, most of the prisons I've seen, are ugly places where you're sent when you're naughty and you can't escape, pretty much. So that is a valid statement. If we take conventional reality of sweetness and sour, sugar is sweet. If we have a conventional reality of what the word pretty means, what the word comfortable means, you would not apply that to some of the prisons I've been to. Now, okay, if you're in prison in Norway, I tell you, the more north you go in Europe, the nicer prisons are. I remember one fellow in Norway writing to me, emailing me. He said he was so excited he couldn't wait to have his 2-year sentence in prison because it was in this wonderful place in the country in Norway where you get education and get taken care of. He was really looking forward to it. So that proves, in that case, hardly called a prison, is it? So prison is still an ugly place. It was horrible. She was locked up in her cell. The sounds were shocking. The food was revolting. These are still valid statements. It's not as if the mind makes it up so there's nothing there. That's nihilism. But because she was able to change her mind and see it as good, she experienced She developed herself. She had developed her own capacity for joy, her own capacity for compassion. So that's proving that, yes, there is something conventionally, but as Lama Zopa says, when we really do understand it, what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't. It's kind of an interesting way of putting it. So you can't argue there's not sweet there, that is, but depending on the person and how their response, you know, it could cause you to die.
Thank
And
you.
everything like that. I mean, if you've got no nerves in your hand, you can pick up a boiling hot cup of tea and it won't hurt you, you know. So it's still, it's dependent. It's still dependent arising. So in other words, dependent arising and emptiness don't contradict reality. Emptiness doesn't contradict reality. And reality isn't set in stone. That's, these two truths are the crucial two to get together, you know, to understand the way things exist. This is this is the teaching on emptiness, and they're very fascinating. And we can kind of see the truth of it. We have to see the truth of it, you know. Thank you, Richard.
I have a
Wolfgang.
question.
Oh yeah, I think Wolfgang had his hand up first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You no, don't be sorry, Victor. Yes, Wolfgang, happy to
Hello,
see you.
Ven Robina. Yes, in the same spirit of Richard, I have the same question and doubt. If there is no negative intention, nevertheless, your action can be very negative, can generate a lot of suffering.
Yes.
And so without negative intention, you generate big suffering, but this will not generate negative karma.
No, this is a very interesting point, Wolfgang. This again shows the dependent arising of everything. So put it like this. There's a, you know, in order for any action we do to be called what they call a complete action, which means that it will sow a karmic seed that will drop into your main bank vault as I talk, which will then be the cause of one of your type of rebirths. A complete action has to have 4 things in place when you do it. So let's just use the simple example of killing. So, okay, even put it more likely, even allowing a being to die. Don't even say actively kill, allowing a being to die. So there's, you know, there's, for example, the story of Lama Yeshe. There's a monk in Kopan who was very sick. And Harry, my American friend, had found a doctor for this monk. And he told Lama, and Lama just said, it doesn't matter, he doesn't need a doctor, he'll be okay. So Harry watched as this monk got sicker and sicker, and eventually went up to the mountains. He was a Sherpa, and he died. So in other words, Lama allowed this monk to die. That's a fact. That's a fact, Wolfgang. Now, then let's just say I've got a mouse in my kitchen and the mouse is suffering, but I'm so lazy and so uncaring, I don't even bother to even help it. I let the mouse die in agony. Do you understand what I'm saying now? Exactly the same scenario, but let's look at the difference. My motivation, so first is the object, a monk and a mouse. That's the first of the 4. Second is our mind involved in it. And this is the crucial piece. This is the main piece of the 4 components in place that determine whether the action we do is negative or positive. So in my case, let's say there was laziness and complete indifference and no compassion. And then the third is, you know, I just do the action of letting the mouse sit there, and 4, the mouse dies. Now, Lama Yeshe, exactly the same. But his mind, because he had the wisdom, we have to take this as a given, he had the wisdom to see the karma of this monk. He knew that the karma the monk had created was quite heavy, and that he knew that if he had got a doctor and gotten better, he would have had a very nice life. But he saw that the karma wouldn't have been finished, and so his next life would have been much more suffering. So Lama, intention, don't give a doctor, don't help the monk, you know, get better. But his reason, his motivation was totally pure. Not only the motivation, he even had, we can assume he had the wisdom to know that was true. So there's an example. That's both extreme examples. But the mind is the key factor. So even normally, even people who kill their pets, it's really common. We put our pets down, don't we? In the modern world, it's so common. So even then, yes, let's just say my little pussycat, when I take it to the vet, and I really have compassion. I do have compassion, and I don't know anything about rebirth, and I'm convinced that if I kill the cat, that her suffering will stop. and the cat, and I get the cat killed. But let's say my cat goes to the lower realms and has a 20 million times worth rebirth. That it actually, I made it worse for the cat. But my motivation, I meant well. But as Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. But nevertheless, the karma can't be too strong for me because I really did mean well. But this is really wise. As Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And that's why we're so foolish. We mean well, and that means your motivation, but it's not that good. You didn't help the cat at all. You put it from the frying pan into the fire, you know. So nevertheless, your compassion, the motivation is the key. Not even in the second component when you do an action. The mouse is there, okay? And one is the intention. Oh, I couldn't, that mouse, I'll leave it. And two is the motivation, laziness, no empathy. So one is intention. I will, let's just a straightforward one. In the case of your pussycat, I will kill the mouse. That's intention. Intention here isn't meaning like good motivation. Intention is bare bones volition. I will. This is the meaning of intention. And that's the whole thing that runs everything in the universe, our intention, not motivation, intention. So in the second part where the mind is involved, the first is the object, a mouse or cat, whatever it is. Second, intention, I will kill the mouse. Motivation, compassion, compassion. 3, you do the action. 4, dead mouse. So intention is I will, but that's got no flavor. Motivation gives it its character, compassion or anger or whatever it is. So from one's own side, they're the key factors for the karma we create. There's far more to it than that. It's far more nuanced and more subtle. But in the end, the main player is not even the action of doing it, is not even the intention I will kill. It's the motivation that impels it. But that's why we have to have wisdom. Compassion is not enough. Meaning well is not enough. We've got to have, so Lama Yeshe's example is a perfect one. If we think he had compassion and wisdom, but I mean, who's got that kind of wisdom, you know? Is it clear? A bit clear? What do you think, Wolfgang?
Yes, thank you very much. Your example with the pet is very nice. You have a very, very good intention.
Yes.
But for the pet, it's very bad.
That's right. So in the end,
Yeah.
It's sort of like I've got a headache, you know, and you say, oh, Robina, I've got a pill, and you're so excited to help me, but you forget whether it's an aspirin or a cyanide, and I died an agonizing death. You'd be a bit shocked, but you wouldn't just say, oh, well, I meant well.
Yep.
Meaning well is not enough. And we can see this in our lives. Meaning well is not enough.
Yeah, but now coming back to the concept of karma, if it's
Yes.
intentions, I have very, very good intention. So
Yes.
it should generate very positive karma, even if the result was very negative.
For you, you got to say that you meant well when you killed your pussycat. You really, see, this is the point. This is the whole thing. If you look into your heart at that moment, you have to say you've got some empathy and compassion. That's real. You can't pretend. So that's what speaks the truth. The compassion is real, but it's not enough. But nevertheless, for you, there won't be a very heavy negative result karmically because it's compassion.
Yep.
But it's not enough is the real point.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand completely. And the second effect is you cannot really value the action of another man, of another person, because you don't know the intention.
That's right, precisely. This is why the Tibetans always say, there's a saying, you don't know who anybody is, so do not judge. You know? It's very, very powerful, very humbling, that one, you know. I know it's true. So this is the other thing, the reverse example of the killing of the cat is a so-called virtuous action. So a virtuous action, an example of a virtuous action would be generosity, giving somebody something that comes from a heart that's open. So let's just say, you know, you're my boyfriend and I want you to be my boyfriend because I think you're rich. So I act like I love you. I'm so kind to you. I pay your taxi fare one day because you can't find your dollars. And you think I'm so nice and generous. My motivation is stinking. I'm only attached to getting your money. That we really can know is very common. So then the action I do of being generous to you is not virtuous. Of course it's not. The motivation is really lousy. So motivation is the energy in your heart at that time that then compels you to do a certain action. You understand? So a so-called virtuous action, relatively generosity is a virtuous action. Relatively killing is a negative action. But the motivation, but being different in each case, can change the karma of the person who did it. But the whole thing proves why we need wisdom. Then the actions we do are perfect. Isn't it? Makes sense, doesn't it? Even in ordinary life, it makes sense. If you know, you might have compassion and do something for your child, but you've got no wisdom and don't see his naughty mind, you know? You've got to have wisdom that knows how to help your child. Compassion on its own is, and often that's why in our lives of parents and people, our compassion is based on attachment, you know? So it makes a mess, doesn't help the child at all. It's really clear. Wisdom and compassion, the two wings of the bird, is very powerful. Thank you, Wolfgang. What else, people? 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock. No, yeah, we've got good time. There's interesting discussions. It's very helpful. Yes,
Hi.
please. Yes, Victor.
Well, I was thinking, I'm back to Richard's chocolate cake.
Yeah.
And the realization that when I'm eating that cake, it always seems to be satisfying something. Either, you know, that the sugar is going to make me feel good because I want that cake because do we ever, other than Buddhahood, get to a point that I'm going to just enjoy the cake just to have the cake?
Of course. Let's look at this. It's a really good discussion, Victor. So, you know, it's very interesting. It's like, this is a very interesting discussion now. I know we've had it already, but this is so important to understand. Like we've talked, in the Buddhist model of the mind, you can divide all states of mind into these 3 categories. There's no fourth category. And that's why it's crucial to understand these character. One is called negative, one is called positive, and one is called neither negative nor positive. And so that's what, so for example, the third lot, neither negative nor positive, and that's why I like to call them mechanics. Intention, this is where, for Wolfgang, just to get clear again, we often do say good intention, meaning motivation. So here, when we look at the word intention, in the Buddhist, correctly used, it literally is this bare bones thought. I will eat my breakfast. I will kill the cat. Volition is the very first thing that leads everything in the mind. Then you can say it's motivated by something positive or negative. But intention itself, not the one that Wolfgang was saying, not like good intention, meaning motivation, but intention is bare bones, simply volition. It drives everything we do. We don't notice it. So intention is one of these examples of the third category that are neither negative nor positive. Then you've got attention. You pay attention. Then you've got concentration. Then you have good memory. Then you have one called discrimination, which is running every second, which is an ability to discriminate this millisecond from the next. Is that pink? That's blue? That's yellow? That's round? That's square? If we didn't have these, we'd be insane. If we didn't have mindfulness, which is good memory, we'd be senile. If we didn't have discrimination, we'd die. So all of these are like the mechanics of the mind. And the point about these is they are vital to do anything, but they're not in their nature negative. They don't have any distorted, neurotic, I-based, fear-based, delusional characteristic, but nor are they virtuous, nor are they kind of got this flavor of connectedness with others, which are the virtuous characteristics. So it's really important to understand these 3 categories. So there's a good example here. So, okay, you're my boyfriend now, Victor. So I will say, 1, I've got attachment for you. That's the first lot. That's negative. If I had mainly attachment and no love, I would be a vampire. I'd be what the world calls a psychotic. And I'm really not joking here. This is the way the Buddhists would say it. You know, attachment on its own is this frantic, I-based, greedy, delusional, fear-based, totally self-centered state of mind. So thank God we've got some love in there that tempers the attachment. Look at any relationship that doesn't work. It is not because of love, honey. So attachment is a self-centered, delusional, living in la-la land state of mind that's really distressing and neurotic. Then I will say, I love you. And that means I maybe do have some love for you. So love is a valid state of mind. It's interconnected with you. It's reasonable. It's sane. It's intelligent. And it sees you and wants you to be happy. That's what love is. Now, we mostly have attachment. And if our relationship's going to work, honey, it's not because of attachment. That's what will destroy it. Because the millisecond my expectation, because that's function of attachment, this vampire in me, the millisecond this vampire doesn't get what it wants and you don't look at me the right way or do the right thing, I'm going to get angry. So then eventually I'll kill you or I'll kill myself, you know. So attachment is the root of all the other delusions and is a nightmare. But we very rarely see it on its own. own, in our own mind, because it's mixed with love. It's mixed with kindness. It's mixed with generosity. It's mixed with love. Do you understand what I'm saying, Victor? So these are utterly, completely separate states of mind, attachment and then love. And you're the object. So now the question, instead of the cake, is it possible to eventually have only love and no attachment? Of course it is. That's the point. Of course it is. Of course it is. But this is where the fascinating point comes now. The third category, it's a cake or you, it's the same, any object of attachment. What happens is there's another, there's only three, another in the category, the third category called the neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. We've got to really think about this. There's another state of mind simply called feeling. And this is neither negative nor is it positive. It's just the way things are in minds. And feeling, we only have three kinds: pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, or neutral feeling. Well, Victor, forget the neutral, okay? They are existing, but we don't bother about them. All you think about the world, all we want are pleasant feelings. So what are synonyms for pleasant feeling? Joy, happiness, ecstasy, rapture, you name it, different levels of happy feelings. They're neither negative nor positive. But our problem is, because we are so addicted to believing that the object of attachment is the cause of pleasant feelings, that's what keeps us paralyzed in samsara. So eventually, when you've given up attachment, even to some degree, you not only won't not have good feelings, you'll have even better feelings, but you won't be attached to them. So attachment drags us down. We all know that when you're really grasping at something, you hardly even notice the pleasure. You're like a greedy vampire. You're like demented. They say attachment makes your mind very greedy and dull. So you lessen the attachment. Honey child, the cake doesn't lose its deliciousness. You'll get even more pleasure from the cake, because feeling is neither negative nor positive. And this is where Lama Yeshe, in his book on Mahamudra, is so marvelous. He talks about the natural potential for the mind at a subtler level in single-pointed concentration. He describes it. You can't even believe it's true. It's like the mind is naturally, absolutely, blissfully, joyfully, rapturously ecstatic, naturally. But it's totally peaceful because there's no attachment when you're a realized being. Joy is the natural state of a mind that's unencumbered by delusions. But what keeps us paralyzed in samsara is the vampire, the attachment that exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. And this is the point. This is the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, the subtle kind of suffering. We believe absolutely, and this is how it all works. One, you see the cake. You've got a program in the mind about the cake. Okay, you see the cake. You've got this programming about the cake. Instantaneously, even as soon as you put it in the mouth, Buddha doesn't disagree. Definitely because of the interdependence of your style, your opinions, your views, and the cake. As soon as it meets your mouth, it will definitely trigger a pleasant feeling. But we completely conflate attachment and pleasant feelings, but they're separate, different states of mind. And so because we're addicted to believing the only way we can get pleasant feelings is by getting the cake. But when you've eventually given up attachment, you will no longer be in the thrall of the cake. You'll be able to see the cake for what it is, but you've still got a mouth, you've still got a tongue, they don't disappear. And you put the cake in the mouth, you'll have 20 times more joy, and you won't be like a vampire for it.
And would you then get hooked on that possibly, or you have to watch getting hooked on that?
Sorry, what?
To kind of up it a level, is once you get to that state, do you always have to keep in mind not to get hooked on to that state?
No, but I'm talking about giving up attachment. I'm talking about genuinely having given up attachment. Right. I mean, if you've given it up, you've given it up, it can't come back.
Okay. All right.
But you don't wait for a sudden overnight change. It's a gradual process. In other words, we can see this in a relationship, Richard. Victor, if you and I have a reasonable relationship and you struggle with your anger and your attachment, I struggle with mine, I compromise, I'll watch the movie you like, we give in to each other, we're kind and generous, our relationship will be successful. It's gradual. So our pleasure will become deeper and deeper. It's not just based on grasping and attachment, because you're working on your mind. So gradually, as we lessen delusions, even a little bit every day, naturally that will bring more pleasure in your mind. That's the pleasure coming from virtue, not the pleasure coming from, sex and drugs and rock and roll. Not being moralistic, it's a fact. Pleasure that comes from virtue is more stable, is more valid, and is more real. Are we communicating?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Victor, what else, people? This is the tragedy of creating. Oh, sorry. Yes, go on then, Sarah. Talk to me.
No,
No, darling. Come on.
all right. I just had a question, like about the whole like labeling things conventionally and then realizing the emptiness of that and then molding our minds. I feel like there's maybe a fine line between, going the joy direction that Sunny did, but then there's also an element potentially skewing to psychosis of like the thermos is a chicken, or like, so where in Buddhism.
Why don't you explain a little bit more what you mean?
Well, so if you aren't labeling things conventionally and you realize that you have the power, that it's happening only in your mind.
Yes.
So you're like, well, throwing conventionality out the window could potentially lead to.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So
no, that's very, people are living like that every day. We're living like that right now. We're believing in what attachment sees. We believe it's real, and we're living, it's like la la land. We're going crazy. So this is not like that. This is where you really can see the practice. Sunny wasn't even a Buddhist, but the practices they talk about in the Mahayana of learning to, be glad to have a problem. You could argue that's being psychotic. You're demented. It's like being a masochist. No, when you're conscious, when you understand attachment, this practice demands a lot of inner awareness. It demands a recognition of what attachment is. It demands an understanding of emptiness. It demands a lot of things. It's quite an advanced practice to do it consciously and properly. That you're able to realize nothing has an intrinsic nature. It's only because of habit, eons of habit, that things appear a certain way to us, and that we can reprogram that. Even put this example. I remember Curtis Senchab Rinpoche, one Lama, I don't know if you've met him. He passed away many years ago. I never forget when he said, he's describing the certain level of compassion of a bodhisattva. And he said, for that bodhisattva, the action of cutting off his hand and feeding it to a starving animal is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. So first of all, that person has to have had a realization of emptiness, has to have had an absolute clear experiential knowledge, because, and so that's the first point. And second, this immense compassion. In other words, what you could say was, for that person, they can feel, they've got nerves, right? There's no question they've got nerves. But because there's no ego grasping, and because there's masses of compassion, the lack of ego grasping, meaning the realization of emptiness, and the compassion are so enormous, they completely override any literal feeling that he would have had, which he would have had, but it would have been as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. I even remember hearing stories about, I remember watch one film on the telly one time about the outrageous things that mothers do for their children. Like one woman ran into a burning house. One woman picked up a car. If they had to stop and think, but there's a fire over there, she would have been paralyzed and not gone in. And even just that, she can see it's a fire, but what was predominant in her mind was her baby. All she could, so it's whatever's in the mind. Do you understand? So yes, of course, you can be psychotic, like the Buddha says we're already psychotic, believing cakes make us happy and all that. That's already demented, This is coming from an intelligent point of view of realizing nothing has an intrinsic nature. And because you want to get rid of attachment, you are happy to have the thing that attachment doesn't like, because it puts an atomic bomb under it, which is the problem, of course. A problem is a thing attachment doesn't want. So you're trying to get rid of it, so you're happy to have the problem. Do you understand? Are we communicating?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. What else, folks? Time to go home soon. Anyway, I'm chatting away here. I don't think I've got any pattern to what I'm talking about. Just raving on. Hope it's useful.
Can I ask one more thing?
Go on, yeah, sure, Richard.
Okay. When the one thing I really like about Buddhism is because it's real experiential. And you were discussing how the Buddha came to this through observation of mind, kind of like Einstein observed relativity, the Buddha observed that. So how does he know about, did he actually see all the different realms? You know, the demigod, the god.
I understand. I understand. See, I mean, the only Richard, all we have to deduce is, if that was his approach, we have to deduce logically that that's exactly what happened. Otherwise, where does it come from? And otherwise, it's sort of like you've made it up. That's what people think of as religion, as speculation. Somebody had a vision and they believe it. And that's how we think of religion, which is so disgraceful. So that's what's shocking to hear, and people can't even get this. But yes, of course, if Buddha is valid, then everything that is valid Buddhism, that's why I've got to check up, because there's so much rubbish published. If something is valid Buddhism, it necessarily has to be from the direct experiential knowledge of a person who is a Buddha. Not just the Buddha then, but people who become Buddha since. It has to be this. We have to take that as our hypothesis until we prove it wrong. There's no question about that.
And I guess it is because, you know, I've read the Dalai Lama's book, and other people have observed the same thing, I guess.
That's right.
Enlightened beings have come after, so we know it's true. It's been confirmed.
That's the way to think. And I think this is the thing, we're not used to using this kind of rigor when it comes to spiritual knowledge. We're only used to that when it comes to, say, scientific knowledge. We treat it with respect there. It's very interesting, isn't it? And as the Dalai Lama said, you know, if you decide you're going to follow Buddha's methodology, because basically Buddha's telling you, this is what I found to be so, here is my methodology, honey, over to you. So as he said, if you're following Buddha's methodology and you're tracking along and ticking the boxes as you go, but at some point you actually do prove he's wrong, then of course you must reject him. That's the point, you know. You do that with Einstein. That's the rigor we use in science. Well, that's the same rigor here, but it surprises us, you know. Yes, exactly, Richard. What else, people? Anything else? Yes, Maddie. Yeah.
Yes, thank you again, Venerable Robina. I hear indifference thrown around. Is indifference the same as ignorance in a way?
Okay, the way to put it, I'd say, if we look into the compassion teachings and the very first practice that we try to cultivate, which is the root of the development of love and compassion, is this practice of developing equanimity. But it's got a very specific meaning. Equanimity, when you've got it in relation to the three categories of beings in the universe. There's the three objects of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Objects of attachment, we can call a friend. Object of aversion, we can call an enemy. An object of ignorance, but is a stranger, but it gives rise to this specific characteristic of ignorance, the root ignorance, and that's called couldn't care. In other words, that mouse in my kitchen, I didn't have disgust and aversion to it. I didn't have attachment. I just didn't care. Bored, so caught up in my own, just can't even see it. Can't even see it. Indifferent, a stranger, you know. So a friend is a person who does what my attachment wants. An enemy is a person who actively doesn't do what my attachment wants. And a stranger is one who does neither. So it's 99% of the universe. We're indifferent, pretty much indifferent to, you know, do you understand? And that's a function of ego grasping, a function of the root delusion. Yeah, exactly. Well, you people, it's time to go.
Thank you.
So all these thoughts we've had, plenty of thoughts. Not one goes astray. There's two things in the mind. One is, as Geshe Tashi in London said, every millisecond, any thought we have, anything we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, this is like just a technical thing. Nothing goes astray. It's like we're shooting a movie all day. Everything gets stored in our memory. And this is talking from beginningless lifetimes, as nutty as that sounds to us. We're not discussing the brain here. We're discussing the cognition, the actual cognition. Our mind has the capacity to retain memory. But the other one is the qualitative one of karma, isn't it? That everything we think and do and say sows seeds in the mind, based upon the motivation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we think for this 90 minutes, all these thoughts we've had, they've all gone in. We mightn't forget. I mean, I've forgotten what we talked about, but, you know, it's gone in. It's good. So then we think karmically, maybe nourish these seeds we've planted with our effort, with our work, with our practice from this second, so that they do ripen just as we motivated in the beginning in our Buddhahood, no matter how long it takes, so we can be, you know, genuinely beneficial to others. And may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. That's it. 2 minutes early. I'm going to leave you 2 minutes. All right, darlings. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week, all being well. Thank you, dearest. Denver and San Francisco and wherever you all are. Where are you, Richard? Where do you live?
I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Oh, very good. Okay. No, that's on that coast. Okay, you dearest people, all of you I can see. Eileen, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Lou. Good to see you, Lou. Thank you,
Thank
Maddie.
you, Venerable.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Burke. Thanks, everybody. Much love.
Night.
Catherine, there's Catherine in North Carolina. You keep popping up. Okay, darlings. Much love.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.